The rain hammered against the ER windows, the night Claire Monroe's world split in half. Manhattan's skyline glowed outside like a cruel reminder that life went on, even when yours stopped. Claire paced the narrow hospital corridor, clutching her phone, her thumb trembling as she dialed her husband for the 7th time. Evan should have been here. He should have been the one running through the automatic glass doors beside her, demanding answers, begging doctors to save their son. Instead, all she heard was the cold emptiness of voicemail. "Evan, please, call me back. It's Eli. It's bad." Her whisper cracked into a sob she tried to swallow. Down the hall, machines beeped, doctors murmured, and the world spun too fast for a mother whose child was fighting for every breath. Claire pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until her knees hit the tile. She checked her phone again, hoping for a missed call, a text, anything. Nothing. Across the city, at a luxury penthouse in Soho, Evan Monroe lay tangled in silk sheets beside Sienna Rhodes, the mistress he thought no one knew about. Candlelight flickered over half-finished champagne, an untouched MacBook Pro on the marble counter, and Evan's iPhone buzzing over and over on silent. He didn't bother checking. He assumed Claire was being dramatic again, always needing something. But in the hospital, Claire stared at the double doors of the pediatric wing as a doctor approached, his expression grave. Her breath caught, her hands went numb. "Mrs. Monroe, we need to talk." Her world dimmed, her pulse roared. She reached for her phone again, praying Evan would finally answer, because if he didn't, he'd never forgive himself. And he had no idea that someone else was watching this unfold, someone who would make sure Evan paid for every second he wasn't there. And that someone was already on his way to the hospital. Claire didn't remember standing. One moment she was on the cold hospital floor, and the next she was following the doctor down the long corridor toward Eli's room. Her legs moved, but her mind was trapped somewhere between hope and terror, clinging to the desperate idea that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't what she feared. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, too bright, too sharp. She pushed open the door. The room felt still, unbearably still. Nurses stepped away quietly, their faces soft with the kind of sympathy that breaks a mother long before any words are spoken. Eli lay small and fragile beneath the blankets, his skin pale, his chest rising only with the help of the machine beside him. Claire rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she cupped his tiny fingers. They were warm, but weaker than she remembered. "Mommy's here," she whispered, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'm right here, sweetheart." For a moment she imagined Evan standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his voice breaking the way it used to when he worried. But the truth was a blank notification screen on her iPhone, no missed calls, no messages. Nothing but silence. A soft knock sounded. Richard Hale stepped inside, his expression controlled but devastated beneath the surface. Claire fell into him without hesitation. He wrapped his arms around her, steadying her as if she were the child now. "I came as soon as I heard," he murmured. "I'm here, Claire. I'm not leaving." The doctor approached quietly. "We've done everything we can," he said. "His body is very tired. We need your permission to let him go peacefully." Claire shook her head, tears spilling as she gripped Eli's hand tighter. "He's supposed to grow up. He's supposed to run and laugh," and her voice cracked before she could finish. Richard rested a hand on her back, grounding her. His own eyes glistened. "Claire, listen to them." She leaned over Eli, pressing her forehead to his. "I love you. You are the best part of me." Her tears dotted the blanket like broken pieces of a life she could no longer hold together. The room dimmed slightly as a nurse lowered the monitors, and Claire felt it, the slow, gentle fading of the smallest hand she'd ever held. Her world fell silent. Her father caught her just before she collapsed. And somewhere across Manhattan, unaware and untouched by the devastation he had caused, Evan Monroe laughed at something Sienna whispered in his ear. Never knowing this night had just changed everything. Morning came far too quickly for a woman who had no more tears left. Claire sat in the family consultation room, staring at the styrofoam cup of untouched hospital coffee. Her hands were still trembling. Her whole body felt hollow like a house with all the lights turned off. Nurses moved quietly outside the door, and footsteps echoed down the hallway, but none of it felt real. Richard Hale stood near the window, jaw tight, eyes locked on the Manhattan skyline. The sunrise cast gold on the East River, but for him, it might as well have been darkness. He had already called the hospital's legal department. He had already ordered his security team to secure every surveillance timestamp from the night before. He had already begun planning what would come next. But first, Claire needed to breathe again. "Sweetheart," Richard said softly, sitting beside her. "We need to talk about arrangements." Claire didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed somewhere far beyond the bland hospital walls. He never came, he didn't even call. Richard's chest tightened. "I know." She swallowed hard, wiping her cheek. "I don't understand how a father, how any parent could just ignore something like this." At that same moment, across the city, Evan Monroe woke in the Soho penthouse he'd rented under a company name. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the shimmer of gold scattered across the marble counter-jewelry Sienna had taken off the night before. His phone lay face down on the nightstand, dozens of missed calls hidden beneath the screen. Sienna stretched lazily, picking up his iPhone with a smirk. "Someone was desperate to reach you," she teased. Evan frowned, scrolling. His expression shifted, first confusion, then annoyance, then faint alarm. Claire called the hospital? Why would she? He stopped mid-sentence as a cold ripple ran through him. Sienna blinked. "Evan? What?" He stood abruptly, grabbing his shirt. "I need to go. Something's wrong. I factively." But even then, even in that moment when a decent man would have run out the door, Evan's instinct wasn't fear for his child. It was fear of how the situation might damage him. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Claire was gone. Richard had taken her home through a private exit to avoid reporters. At the front desk, Evan put on his most sympathetic expression, rehearsed in polished boardrooms and investor meetings. "I'm Claire Monroe's husband," he said smoothly. "I just heard. I need to know what happened." He looked devastated, almost believable. But the nurse who had watched Claire crumble the night before had seen men like him before. And she knew instantly that he was already preparing his version of the story. A version Claire would soon discover was nothing but a carefully crafted lie. While Claire lay in silence at her father's estate, the other woman at the center of this storm was starting her morning in a very different world. Sienna Rhodes stepped out of a black Mercedes S-Class onto Fifth Avenue, her heels clicking confidently on the pavement. She adjusted her sunglasses, the kind favored by influencers who wanted to appear effortless, then headed inside a high-end PR firm housed in a glass tower overlooking Central Park. To everyone who worked there, Sienna wasn't just an employee, she was a rising star. She had the kind of ambition that made people uncomfortable, the sort you could smell on someone before they even spoke. Her office wasn't large, but the views were impeccable. On her desk sat a Tiffany notebook, an iPhone with a glittering case, and a stack of invitations to the city's most exclusive events. If an elite charity gala needed attention, if a scandal needed burying, or if a client needed to be transformed into a media darling, Sienna was the one they called. And now she had something even more valuable than ambition: Evan Monroe. The relationship wasn't built on love, not even attraction. It was opportunity, pure, strategic, calculated. Evan had money, status, and insecurity, a combination Sienna knew how to weaponize. She had found her way into his life through late-night strategy meetings, well-timed compliments, and the magnetic promise of a lifestyle he believed he deserved. This morning, she stood before her office window, scrolling through Evan's unanswered calls from the night before. Her eyebrows arched slightly when she saw they were all from Claire. "Something must have happened," she murmured to herself, though the concern in her voice was thin and fleeting. A knock on her door interrupted her. "Sienna, the Harrington Foundation just sent over final details for next month's gala," her assistant said. "They want you to lead the media rollout. Quote, Davint with them, Borsgas." Sienna smiled, a practiced expression that gave nothing away. "Perfect. Prep the team, and schedule Evan for a fitting he'll want a new tux." Her assistant blinked. "Are you two going public?" "Not yet," she said, twisting her hair thoughtfully, "but soon." Because in her mind, Claire Monroe was already out of the picture. She assumed Evan's marriage was all but over, a minor obstacle, a step she had already planned around. But as she gathered her invitations, checking her schedule, a message flashed across Evan's phone, one he hadn't seen yet, one that would change everything she thought she controlled. And when she finally read it, her perfect plan began to crack. The ride to Richard Hale's estate felt like drifting through a fog. Claire sat silently in the back of the car, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing. The world outside the tinted windows, Manhattan's bustle, the river, the long stretch of highway passed like a muted blur. Her father didn't speak during the drive. He knew silence was the only thing she could bear right now. When they arrived at the Hamptons estate, the ocean breeze greeted them first, soft and cool. Claire stepped out slowly, as if every movement required permission. She walked into the house where she had spent summers as a teenager, a place that once felt safe. But tonight, even safety felt foreign. She sank onto the living room sofa, the one facing the wide glass doors overlooking the water. The sun was dipping low, painting the waves in gold. Richard sat beside her, not touching her, but close enough to catch her if she folded again. "Dad," she whispered finally, her voice cracked and tired. "What do I do now?" Richard inhaled slowly, carefully. "Right now, you breathe. That's all you need to do." But Claire shook her head. "He didn't come. He didn't care. Eli was." Her voice broke. "How am I supposed to live with that?" Richard's jaw tightened. "He made his choice, Claire, and he will answer for it." She stared at him, confused. "Answer how?" "You focus on healing. I'll handle the rest." Hours passed, like shadows drifting across the room. Claire barely moved. She replayed every moment, the calls Evan ignored, the doctor's voice, Eli's final warmth in her hands. Grief washed over her in waves so strong she felt she might drown. But at the same time, a small, trembling ember of anger began to glow inside her chest. Late that night, she walked out onto the balcony, wrapping her arms around herself as the ocean wind whipped her hair. The water stretched endlessly before her, dark and alive. She whispered into the night, "I'm sorry, Eli. I'm so sorry." Richard watched from behind the glass doors. His heart ached for her, but grief had never stopped him from acting. He lifted his phone, dialing one of his most trusted investigators. "I want everything," he said coldly. "Where Evan was, who he was with, every detail." He hung up, turning back toward Claire, because while she could barely stand, the wheels of consequence were already turning. And soon, the first truth about Evan's betrayal would crash into her life like a tidal wave. 2 days passed before Claire felt strong enough to leave her room. Grief had carved her hollow, but something else had begun to sharpen beneath the surface questions. Unanswered ones. Heavy ones. Ones she could no longer silence. That morning, she found her father in his study, seated behind a sleek Mont Blanc black desk, reviewing a set of documents with the precision of a man accustomed to dismantling empires. The room smelled faintly of cedar, and the ocean drifting through the open windows. "Dad?" Claire's voice was thin, but steadier than before. Richard lifted his eyes. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. Finally, he slid a folder toward her. "We need to talk about where Evan was that night." Claire froze, her stomach twisted, uneasy. "I already know he didn't answer. I don't need to." "You deserve the truth," Richard said firmly. "No matter how ugly." Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were time-stamped security photos, receipts, elevator logs from a penthouse in Soho, a hotel guest registry under a subsidiary of Evan's company. But the piece that made her breath stop was the final image. Evan, in a tailored suit, stepping into a private elevator at 7:42 p.m., not alone. Beside him was a woman with long dark hair, wearing a crimson dress, smiling up at him as if the world belonged to her. Sienna Rhodes. Claire felt her heart squeeze so tightly she thought she might faint. "He was with her when I was calling about Eli?" Richard's eyes softened with sorrow but hardened with resolve. "He wasn't just ignoring your calls, Claire. He was choosing someone else." Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the wave of betrayal rising inside her. She remembered every unanswered call, every minute she waited alone, every plea she whispered into a phone that would never be answered. "He didn't even try," she whispered. "Not once." Richard nodded. "And he intended for you to never know." Claire stared at the evidence, tears sliding down her cheeks silently. Betrayal felt different today, colder, sharper. The pain of losing Eli hadn't faded, but now it was joined by another ache, deeper and somehow more infuriating. Richard leaned forward. "Sweetheart, this is only the beginning of what I found." Claire lifted her eyes, fear and anger now sharing space inside her chest. "What do you mean?" Her father exhaled slowly, his expression grave. Evan wasn't just unfaithful, he said. He was planning something much worse. And when Claire heard the next revelation, her world would break for the second time. Claire stared at her father, the folder still open on her lap, the images burning into her memory. Evan's betrayal had already felt like a blade, but Richard's expression told her there was another wound waiting sharper, deeper. "Tell me," she whispered. "I need to know everything." Richard folded his hands, the calmness in his posture at odds with the storm forming behind his eyes. Evan wasn't just unfaithful, Claire. He was positioning himself to separate from you in a way that would have left you with nothing. Her breath stilled. "What?" Richard nodded toward the second folder he had set aside. He contacted a discreet attorney 3 weeks ago. He requested dissolution paperwork. He asked for consultation on how to shift assets before filing. Claire's voice cracked. "Shift assets? Why would he even?" "Because he wanted a clean exit," Richard said darkly. "One that benefited only him. And from what I've uncovered, Sienna was never just a fling. She was part of his strategy." Claire's pulse thudded loudly in her ears. The betrayal wasn't emotional, it was calculated. Cold, planned. Richard continued, his tone flattening into something dangerous. "He began funneling funds from his joint holdings with you into a private account. He altered corporate payout structures. He made sure any trace of financial security tied to you vanished before he served you papers." Claire felt numb. "He was preparing to abandon me while our son was still alive." Richard's eyes softened, but the fury beneath them was unmistakable. "He underestimated you, and he underestimated me." He stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a leather portfolio. Inside were documents bearing the logos of high-level law firms, investment groups, and regulatory agencies. "I've been monitoring him since the first sign of trouble in your marriage, not because I wanted to invade your life, but because I knew the kind of man he was becoming." Claire blinked up at him. "So you already started something?" Richard nodded once. "I've assembled a team. Financial analysts, legal strategists, media advisors. Evan thinks he owns his company. He thinks his reputation is untouchable. He thinks Sienna is his golden ticket into the world he always wanted." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But all three can be taken from him." Claire swallowed hard. "Dad, what are you planning to do?" Richard met her gaze, a father's love wrapped in a billionaire's ruthlessness. "Everything he tried to steal from you," he said quietly, "I am going to take from him. Take Spada." He placed a final sheet of paper before her, a map of the first strike against Evan Monroe's empire. And as Claire leaned in to read it, she realized revenge would begin much sooner than she expected. The morning she left Manhattan, the city felt strangely distant, like a life she had once lived but no longer recognized. Claire stood at the window of her apartment for the last time, watching taxis weave through traffic, watching people rush to jobs, meetings, lunches, living lives untouched by the kind of loss that splits a heart in two. Her suitcase rested by the door. Not much inside, just clothes, a framed photo of Eli, and the essentials her father insisted she take. The rest, she couldn't bear to look at. Too many memories. Too much pain stitched into every corner of the home she and Evan once pretended was happy. Richard arrived with quiet footsteps. "The car's ready," he said softly. Claire nodded, wiping her cheek. "I don't know if I can walk out of here." "You already have," he replied. "The moment he chose someone else over your son, you walked away from this place forever." She let out a shaky breath and followed him down the hall. Each step felt like closing the pages of a chapter she never wanted to reread. When the elevator doors opened, the lobby's cold marble floor reflected her faint, tired reflection back at her. She barely recognized the woman staring back. But the Hamptons greeted her differently. The Hale estate stretched out along the shoreline, serene and open, the waves washing gently against the sand. Her room overlooked the ocean, filled with light and soft white linens that smelled of clean air and salt. For the first time in weeks, Claire breathed without feeling like her ribs were breaking. She spent the first few days wandering the property. She walked along the water's edge at sunrise, clutching a warm Starbucks cup, the steam brushing her face. She read quietly in the sunroom with a Kindle her father set on the table, already loaded with books he hoped would bring her comfort. She sat under the massive willow tree where she used to sketch as a girl. And slowly, her grief found places to rest. But healing was not the same as forgetting. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Claire found herself standing on the balcony, staring out at the waves. For the first time, anger stirred, not destructive, but steady, clear, a feeling that told her she wasn't done fighting for her son's memory. Inside the house, Richard watched her from the doorway. He could see it, the shift, the beginning of her rise. He reached for his phone, because now that Claire could stand again, it was time for the next phase of his plan. And that plan would strike Evan where he never saw it coming. For weeks, the Hale estate became Claire's sanctuary, a place where the noise of grief softened and the sharpest edges of loss dulled just enough for her to breathe. But Richard knew grief wasn't something to drown in. It was something to rebuild from. And he was determined to give Claire the tools to rise again, not just emotionally, but in the life she had once dreamed of. On a crisp morning, he found her sketching quietly on the terrace, overlooking the water. The breeze lifted her hair, and for the first time in a long time, she looked present. Fragile, yes, but alive. "You always did have an eye for space," Richard remarked, setting down 2 cups of tea. "You used to draw houses before you even learned to read. If you do state of one written." Claire gave a faint smile. "It feels strange picking up a pencil again." "Strange," he said, "but right." Richard wasn't subtle. He placed a sleek folder in front of her design mock-ups, potential office leases, and a letter of interest from a top architecture firm on Fifth Avenue. "Your talent deserves more than being tucked away behind someone else's shadow," he said. "If you're ready, I want to help you start your own interior design studio." The words hit her like a warm shock. "My studio? Dad, I don't know if I can." "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will. Not because of Evan. Not because of what happened, but because this is who you were always meant to be." Something inside her flickered, an old spark she thought had died. Claire looked out at the ocean, imagining spaces she could restore, stories she could rewrite through color and light. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a cliff. It felt like an open door. Over the next few days, she allowed herself to work. Small steps at first, mood boards, color palettes, sketches. Late afternoons spent rearranging the sunroom furniture until the space felt like something she would design for a client. She found pieces of herself in every decision, and Richard watched with quiet pride. Every new sketch was a sign she was coming back to life. Every blueprint was another stone laid in the foundation of her return. But growth also sharpened her clarity. One evening, as she reviewed floor plans on her MacBook, she paused, her eyes drifting to a photo frame of Eli on her desk. Her heart tightened, but grief no longer drowned her. It pushed her. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered. Upstairs, Richard's phone buzzed with a message from his investigator. "Update on Evan Monroe. Urgent." He walked toward Claire's room, each step heavy, because the next revelation was not about healing. It was about war. Evan Monroe always believed he could outrun consequences. For years, he'd built his career on charm, loopholes, and well-timed smiles. But the first cracks in his empire appeared exactly where he least expected, behind closed boardroom doors. It began with numbers. Subtle shifts in projected earnings, quiet hesitation from investors, a sudden reluctance from a major partner to renew their contract. Evan dismissed it all as temporary turbulence. Every company faced dips. He strutted into meetings wearing his tailored navy suit and polished confidence, certain he could talk his way through anything. But this time, something felt off. During a quarterly review, 2 board members exchanged a look when Evan spoke. Another scribbled notes furiously whenever he mentioned company expenditures. Their questions pierced deeper than usual about fund allocations, travel expenses, consulting fees that didn't have clear documentation. "Is there a problem?" Evan asked, forcing a tight smile. One of the directors cleared his throat. "We're just auditing some irregularities." Irregularities. The word echoed uncomfortably. Across the table, Sienna sat with crossed legs, pretending to look supportive, though the tension in her posture betrayed her. She wasn't smiling now. By evening, more strange ripples formed. A long-standing investor abruptly canceled dinner. A banking partner requested updated financial statements. A regulatory official asked for additional documentation as a precaution. Evan's annoyance morphed into unease. Then came the blow he didn't expect: media silence. Where once he could plant flattering articles about upcoming projects, Suddenly, no outlet replied. PR agencies he had on speed dial responded with vague excuses. Even Sienna's industry contacts were unavailable. He paced his office, staring at the Manhattan skyline as if the city owed him an explanation. "What is happening?" he snapped. Sienna perched on his desk, arms folded. "It's like someone is targeting you." He shot her a glare. Who would dare? But she didn't answer, because even she knew only one man in New York had both the motive and the reach. By midnight, his inbox filled with new complications, meeting cancellations, postponed deals, a quiet request from the board to discuss future leadership stability. Future leadership stability. They were circling him. Evan slammed his laptop shut, rage boiling under his skin. "This is sabotage," he muttered. "Someone's engineering this." Sienna hesitated, then finally voiced the name neither wanted to say. "Evan, what if it's Claire's father?" He froze. Richard Hale wasn't a man you crossed. He wasn't just wealthy, he was influential, strategic, and famously protective of his daughter. If he had decided Evan was an enemy, Evan swallowed hard. "What did he tell Claire?" he whispered, suddenly pale. Sienna didn't know, but she knew one thing. Whatever Richard had started, it was only phase 1, and the second phase was already on its way. The morning Richard received the latest investigative report, the ocean outside his study was calm, but inside the house, a storm was ready to break. Claire stepped into the room with a quiet confidence she hadn't shown in months. Her studio planning boards were tucked under her arm, and a soft determination glowed in her eyes. She was healing, rebuilding. Richard wished he didn't have to shatter her peace. "Claire," he said, his tone heavier than usual. "We need to talk." She set the boards down. "What did you find this time?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed her a single sheet of paper, nothing more than a printed email, but its implications were enough to freeze her breath. It was correspondence between Evan and a private consulting firm. At first, Claire didn't understand, until she read the subject line. Projected PR strategy, preparing for public separation and custody positioning. Custody positioning. Claire gripped the paper so hard it wrinkled. "He was preparing to take Eli," she whispered, horror rising in her throat. "He wanted to take my baby away from me?" Richard nodded grimly. His lawyer told him a planned narrative could paint you as unstable. It was part of his exit strategy. With Sienna by his side, he intended to present himself as the stable, capable parent. Claire staggered back, pressing her hand to her mouth. How could he plan that while Eli was still? Richard didn't let her finish. "Because Evan saw your son as leverage, not family." The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, Claire couldn't breathe. Betrayal was one thing, but this cruelty was beyond comprehension. Her father continued, voice low. "He was willing to use your postpartum anxiety from months ago as evidence. He intended to claim you were emotionally volatile, that the environment at his luxury condo was better suited for a child." Claire's eyes burned with fresh agony. "He wanted to steal him from me." "He wanted to erase you," Richard corrected. Silence swallowed the room, not the fragile silence of grief, but the charged, heavy silence before fury finds its voice. Then Claire straightened, her jaw tightening. "I won't let his lies be the last thing left of our family." Richard allowed a small, approving nod. "Good. Because now that we know his intent, phase 2 of the plan begins." She looked up sharply. "What's phase 2? Richard slid another folder toward her, this one marked with the name of a major federal regulatory agency. "Evan's financial misconduct doesn't just hurt investors," he said. "It's illegal." Claire blinked in shock. "You mean he could?" Richard's eyes hardened. "Yes, and he will. Because the next move would not just threaten Evan's career, it would threaten his freedom." 6 weeks later, Manhattan looked different to Claire Monroe, not because the city had changed, but because she had. The woman who stepped out of the black town car onto Fifth Avenue was not the shattered mother who once begged her husband to pick up the phone. She walked with a quiet power, wrapped in a tailored navy coat, her hair swept neatly behind her shoulders. She carried no sadness on her face, only purpose. Her father's investment had helped her secure a boutique studio space overlooking the park. Sunlight streamed onto the clean white floors, illuminating drafting tables, fabric swatches, and architectural models. Her name, Clyro Interiors, was printed elegantly on the glass door. For the first time in months, she felt grounded, capable. herself again. Her assistant, a bright young designer named Naomi, greeted her with a warm smile. "Morning, Claire. We have 2 new client inquiries, and a gallery on Madison Avenue requested a proposal for their remodel." Claire's heart lifted. Work didn't erase the pain, but it gave shape to her days, order to her thoughts, a reason to keep moving. "I'll review the proposals after lunch," she said. "Let's aim to finalize the color boards today." As Naomi nodded and stepped away, Claire approached her desk. Eli's photo sat in a small silver frame beside her MacBook. She touched it gently. "I'm doing this for us," she whispered. Across the city, whispers had already begun to echo through the business world. People talked about Claire's unexpected return, her professional relaunch, her father's involvement, and those whispers inevitably found their way to Evan. He sat in his office, scrolling through an online feature that showcased Claire's new studio. The headline was simple but sharp. "Designer Claire Monroe opens boutique firm on 5th Avenue. 2. There in Mindus," and of course, Evan's jaw tightened. "She's back?" Sienna peeked over his shoulder. "You didn't think she'd disappear forever, did you?" He didn't answer. His mind was spinning. Claire wasn't supposed to rise. She was supposed to fade quietly while he reinvented himself. But now her name was resurfacing, her circle expanding, her presence growing. And worse, people respected her. Back at her studio, Claire met with a potential client, presenting sketches with a confidence she thought she had lost forever. The client listened, impressed, before shaking her hand warmly. "You have a rare gift," he said. "I'd be honored to work with you." When he left, Claire exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from her chest. She was rebuilding not just a career, but her identity. Yet, as she locked the studio that evening, her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "We need to meet tonight. It's urgent." Claire's heart tightened, because whatever Richard had discovered next was aimed directly at Evan's life. Sienna Rhodes had built her life on the illusion of control. She knew how to spin a headline, redirect attention, charm a room, manipulate a narrative. But nothing unsettled her faster than the sense that a story was slipping from her hands, and lately, everything was. It started with the calls she couldn't get returned. A brand partnership she'd nearly secured went silent. A high-profile client she'd dazzled the week before suddenly went in another direction. Even the Harrington Foundation gala team, who had promised her the lead PR role, now seemed evasive. At first, she blamed the market, then the season, then overbooking. But deep down, a cold suspicion gnawed at her. Someone was cutting her off. She sat at her vanity that morning, adjusting a diamond earring Evan had gifted her. The apartment around her was immaculate, sun pouring in through tall windows, city noise muffled against thick glass. But even wrapped in luxury, she couldn't shake the discomfort crawling up her spine. Evan emerged from the bathroom, adjusting his tie. "You look tense," he said. "I'm fine," she replied too quickly. He raised an eyebrow. "Sienna, your voice goes up half an octave when you're lying." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Evan, has anyone contacted you? Anyone important? Investors? Partners? Anyone acting strange?" He stiffened. Everything's normal, but she knew that wasn't true. Evan hadn't slept well in days. His temper was short, his phone calls increasingly heated. Yesterday he slammed his office door so hard the frame shook. Sienna crossed her legs, studying him. "This isn't coincidence, Evan. Something or someone is working against us." She didn't say the name, but it hovered between them. Richard Hale. "He wouldn't dare," Evan muttered, though doubt flickered in his eyes. Sienna stood and walked toward him, slipping her arms around his neck. "Evan, this thing with Claire, it's not just a breakup. Her father is powerful. And if he thinks you hurt her, he can't destroy me," Evan snapped. "My company is already unraveling," she interrupted gently. He pulled away, pacing. "I just need to get ahead of the story. Reframe the narrative, control the optics." But Sienna wasn't thinking about optics anymore. She had clawed her way into Manhattan's elite circles, and she could feel herself being pushed back out. And if Evan fell, she'd fall harder. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She hesitated, then opened the message. It was a screenshot of her walking into the Soho penthouse with Evan the night Claire's son passed away. Her blood ran cold. A second message followed. "You should choose your next move carefully, Miss Rhodes. Sienna's hands shook. Because someone wasn't just targeting Evan. They were coming for her too. Claire arrived at the private dining room on the Upper West Side, expecting only her father. Instead, she found Evan already seated at the table, his posture stiff, his expression carefully arranged into something he thought looked remorseful. Richard stood near the window, arms crossed, watching Evan the way a judge watches a man already sentenced. Claire froze. What is he doing here? Evan rose quickly. Claire, please. I needed to see you. Her pulse hardened. She hadn't seen him in person since the hospital, and the sight of him stirred something cold in her veins. Richard gestured. 5 minutes. Then he's gone. Evan took a step toward her. Claire, I heard about your studio. I'm glad you're working again. I really am. She stared at him, unmoved. Say what you came to say. He inhaled, placing a hand over his chest as if performing sincerity. I know things look bad. I should have been there. I should have answered. But I was overwhelmed, confused. Stop, Claire cut in. Don't insult me by pretending this was a misunderstanding. End quote. The section of. The mask cracked. Evan's jaw tightened. Fine, I made mistakes, but I can fix this. We can fix this. We don't need lawyers or the media involved. Just come home. We can rebuild. She almost laughed. Home? Which one? The penthouse you rented for your mistress? He flinched. Claire, please. You're emotional. You're hurting. People say things. Richard stepped forward. Choose your next words carefully. Evan swallowed, then turned back to her. Look, with everything happening at the company, the board is nervous. Investors want stability. If you continue making things public, it could destroy my career, and that's not good for either of us. There it was, the real reason he came. Not regret. Self-preservation. Claire held his gaze, letting the silence expose him. Evan, you're not afraid of losing me. You're afraid of losing your image. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand how this world works. Richard let out a low, humorless laugh. She understands perfectly. What you don't understand is that you no longer control the narrative. Evan turned red. Richard, I know you're interfering, but I'm warning you, if you keep this up, I'll fight back. Claire stepped closer, her voice a quiet blade. You already fought, Evan. You just didn't expect me to stand up. He opened his mouth, but Claire raised a hand. We're done. Whatever you came here to manipulate, it won't work. Not anymore. And well. Evan's expression darkened, something vicious curling behind his eyes. You think you've won? You don't know what I'm capable of. Richard answered for her. And you don't know what I've already set in motion. Evan froze, because something in Richard's tone told him the ground beneath him was about to split. And the next move wouldn't just weaken him, it would destroy him. By the time Evan stormed out of the private dining room, Richard Hale had already made 3 quiet phone calls. Each one was a command delivered with the precision of a man who'd spent decades shaping the financial landscape of New York. Each one tightened the snare around Evan Monroe's carefully built empire. The next morning, Claire arrived at her studio early, wanting to lose herself in fabric textures and architectural sketches. But even as she leaned over her drafting table, she sensed the shift in the city's rhythm, like the air itself was holding its breath. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Evan walked into his headquarters, expecting to regain control after his failed attempt at manipulating Claire. Instead, he found chaos simmering beneath polished surfaces. His assistant rushed toward him. Mr. Monroe, the board needs you in the conference room. Immediately. Evan frowned. Why? We don't have a scheduled. They called an emergency session. The words made his stomach tighten. When he entered the room, every board member was already seated, their expressions cold, their laptops open. A large screen displayed a series of financial charts, red arrows, downward slopes, flagged inconsistencies. The chairman cleared his throat. Evan, we've received multiple notices from investors expressing concerns about financial mismanagement. They're demanding transparency. Evan stiffened. What mismanagement? We're solid. We also received an anonymous packet last night, another board member added, sliding documents across the table, containing detailed evidence of fund transfers from company accounts to private entities linked directly to you. Evan's pulse spiked. He recognized the documents, internal schedules, spreadsheets, wire confirmation receipts, information no one should have had access to. Someone had exposed him. This is taken out of context, Evan snapped. Those reallocations were for restructuring. There are also inconsistencies in your travel expenses, the chairman continued, unbothered by the interruption. Including charges at a penthouse rental the same night your wife was at the hospital. A deadly silence followed. Sienna, who sat across the room as a strategic consultant, paled. Evan shot her a warning glare, but she didn't move. One board member leaned back. Evan, our investors are demanding action. We can't risk the stability of the company. For now, we are voting on temporary removal of your executive authority pending an investigation. The words hit him like a punch. You're removing me? He barked. On what grounds? On the grounds that your leadership is now a liability. Evan slammed his hand on the table. This is Hale. He's behind this. All of it. No one denied it. Because everyone in that room knew exactly what Richard Hale was capable of. And if he had declared war, there was no weapon Evan possessed that could match him. The vote was swift. Unanimous. Evan Monroe stepped out of the boardroom, stripped of power, drenched in humiliation, rage boiling through every vein. But the worst part wasn't the loss. It was the realization. Claire hadn't just walked away from him. She was rising above him. And Richard wasn't finished. His next move would strike far deeper than the boardroom. Claire arrived at her father's study just after sunset. The sky outside streaked in deep purples and fading gold. Richard stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, staring out at the waves crashing against the shore. The posture alone told her something was different tonight, heavier, sharper. Dad, Claire said softly, your message sounded urgent. Richard turned, his expression unreadable. He gestured toward a leather folder resting on his desk. I need you to see this. It's about the night. Everything happened. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself forward. I thought we already knew the worst. Richard hesitated, something he rarely did. So did I. Claire opened the folder. Inside were transcripts, phone logs, timestamps, fragments of a conversation between Evan and his attorney. At first, they looked routine, but one line stood out, highlighted in red. Client requests assurance that medical emergency calls cannot be traced back to him. Claire blinked, confused. Medical emergency calls? What is this? Richard exhaled slowly. That night, Claire, you didn't just call Evan. The hospital called him too. Her breath caught. The hospital? They reached out? Twice, he said grimly. One call from the ER nurse, another from the attending physician. Both urgent, both unanswered. Claire felt her knees weaken. He knew? He knew Eli was in critical condition and still didn't come? Richard's eyes filled with a sorrow he rarely revealed. He knew more than we realized. When the nurse left a voicemail explaining Eli's condition, Evan listened to it. Claire's heart thudded painfully. But he told me he didn't know. He swore he had no idea what was happening. He lied, Richard said softly. He heard that message at 8:03 p.m. You called again at 8:07. He declined the call. Then he put his phone on Do Not Disturb. The room spun. Claire clutched the back of a chair, her breath shaking. He knew our son was dying, and he stayed with her? Richard nodded once. He wanted to avoid anything that could pull him away from the life he was building with Sienna. He didn't just ignore you, Claire. He abandoned Eli knowingly. For a long, agonizing moment, Claire didn't speak. Her tears didn't fall, they burned. Something inside her cracked, but not in the fragile way grief had broken her before. This break was quieter, colder, sharper. She straightened slowly, lifting her chin. Then this isn't just betrayal, she said, voice trembling but fierce. This is something he will answer for. Richard stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. And he will. Because I've uncovered one more thing, something far bigger than we imagined. Claire looked up, breath unsteady. What now? Richard met her eyes, his expression darkening. Evan wasn't the only one involved that night, and the truth about who else participated would change everything. The Plaza Hotel gleamed like a crown against the Manhattan night, its chandeliers casting warm light across gowns, tuxedos, and the hush of whispered ambition. Tonight's charity gala was the kind of event Evan used to dominate, where cameras gravitated toward him and executives lined up to shake his hand. But that era was fading, slipping past him like the last seconds of a dying star. And he didn't even know the final blow was walking through the gold-trimmed doors at that very moment. Claire Monroe stepped out of the black car, her navy evening gown flowing like a quiet wave behind her. It was her first major public appearance since Eli's passing, something she once thought she'd never be strong enough to face again. But tonight wasn't about pain. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. Richard Hale walked beside her, dignified, unreadable, as the crowd instinctively parted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Photographers straightened, sensing the presence of someone whose story had just shifted from tragedy to quiet power. Inside, the orchestra played a slow classical piece. Crystal glasses chimed. Wealthy donors mingled beneath towering arrangements of white roses. And across the room, Evan froze. He hadn't expected her. Not like this. Not radiant, not composed, not surrounded by people who immediately stepped toward her with admiration rather than pity. For a moment, he forgot the investigation, the board's vote, the investors fleeing like birds sensing a storm. His wife, no. His ex-wife looked untouchable. Sienna, standing at Evan's side, stiffened. She recognized the danger instantly. Claire's return wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. Evan regained himself enough to approach, jaw tight, smile forced. "Claire," he said, voice low, "you shouldn't be here." She turned to him calmly. "Then why are you shaking?" His face reddened. "We need to talk. In private." "No," she replied softly. "Everything between us belongs in the open now." Richard stepped forward, but Claire raised a hand. She didn't need protection. Guests watched discreetly as Evan leaned closer, voice barely controlled. "You're trying to ruin me." "You ruined yourself," she said. "I'm just no longer covering for you." And when passive con. Before he could respond, a familiar voice approached the trio. "Mr. Monroe?" It was the event coordinator holding a sealed envelope. "This was delivered for you." "Urgent," they said. Evan frowned and tore it open. Inside was a single slip of paper bearing the seal of a federal agency. His eyes widened. Sienna's breath hitched. Claire held his gaze, steady, unwavering, because she already knew what it said. And the moment Evan read the final line, the color drained from his face completely. Evan read the letter once, then again, his eyes widening as the reality settled like ice in his veins. The federal seal glared up at him, bold and unforgiving. A formal notice of investigation, financial misconduct, fraudulent misallocation of corporate funds, regulatory violations. His worst nightmare, wrapped neatly in an envelope. He staggered back a step. Sienna grabbed his arm. "Evan, what does it say?" He couldn't speak. The room tilted, the chandeliers blurring into streaks of light. Conversations continued around them, unaware or uncaring of the implosion happening in their corner. Richard Hale stood a few feet away, watching him with quiet satisfaction. A man who didn't raise his voice. A man who didn't need to. He had already won. Evan finally forced words out. "They're opening. A full investigation. They think I..." His throat tightened. "This could ruin me." "It's covered." "Could?" Richard said calmly. "No, Evan, it will." Evan turned to him, rage and desperation warring in his expression. "You did this. You're destroying my life." Richard stepped forward, voice low but cutting like tempered steel. "You destroyed your own life the night you left my daughter to face the unimaginable alone. I am simply ensuring the world knows who you really are." Sienna looked between them, panic creeping into her features. "Richard, Mr. Hale, maybe we can talk." "You should start preparing your own statement, Miss Rhodes," Richard said without looking at her. "You're mentioned in several documents." Her breath caught. "What? I didn't." "You participated," he said. "Willingly or not, the law won't care." Sienna's face drained of color. Evan ran a hand through his hair frantically. "Listen, this investigation. It'll blow over. I'll get my lawyers. I'll fix this." "If you won?" Claire watched him slowly, her expression unreadable but no longer broken. "You can't fix what you never took responsibility for." Evan glared at her, trembling. "You think you've won? That this makes you better than me?" "No," Claire said softly. "It makes me free." Before Evan could answer, his phone buzzed violently. Another message, another blow. His bank had frozen 3 accounts. Then another notification, investors pulling out. Then another, his interim CEO requesting an emergency meeting without him. Evan felt his chest tighten. The collapse was happening in real time. "Richard," he pleaded, voice cracking. "Please, I'm begging you. Don't let them destroy everything I built." Richard met his eyes with chilling calm. "You should have begged for your son." Silence swallowed the room. Photographers kept snapping pictures, unaware that they were capturing the downfall of a man who once thought himself untouchable. And just when Evan thought nothing worse could come, another figure stepped into the ballroom. A federal agent. He approached with purpose. "Evan Monroe?" he asked, flashing his badge. Evan's stomach dropped, because the next words would seal his fate. The ballroom fell silent as the federal agent stepped toward Evan Monroe, badge glinting beneath the chandelier light. Evan felt the weight of 100 eyes turned toward him, each gaze carrying a mixture of curiosity, shock, and something far worse, judgment. "Mr. Monroe," the agent said firmly, "we need you to come with us for questioning regarding financial misconduct and obstruction of a federal inquiry." Evan's throat constricted. "Questioning? Here? In front of this is a gala." But the agent didn't waver. "You can come quietly, or we can escalate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People whispered behind raised champagne glasses, phones discreetly angled toward him. This was no longer a private scandal, it was a public spectacle. Sienna stepped back from Evan as though he were contagious. I didn't know they'd come tonight," she whispered, but her voice trembled with something closer to self-preservation than loyalty. Claire stood near the edge of the room, not triumphant, not gloating, simply watching the truth unfold. She had imagined this moment countless times, imagining how it would feel, but in reality, it didn't taste like victory. It tasted like closure. Richard approached her quietly. "Are you all right?" She nodded. He's finally facing what he ran from. Evan tried to straighten his jacket, clinging desperately to dignity. "This is a mistake," he insisted. "I'm the victim of a smear campaign. Claire's father, he orchestrated all of this." But the agent simply said, "Sir, turn around." Cape and 7 dime. As the cuffs clicked around Evan's wrists, gasps echoed through the ballroom. The flash of a camera lit the air. A second photographer captured the moment from another angle. By the time Evan was escorted toward the exit, his downfall was already spreading across every social media platform in Manhattan. His phone buzzed furiously in his pocket, calls from lawyers, messages from panicked board members, alerts from financial institutions. But it was too late for damage control. Outside, reporters swarmed like sharks, scenting blood in the water. "Evan, is it true you misused investor funds? Are you being charged? Is your mistress involved? Where is your wife? Does she know about the allegations?" Sienna tried to slip out unnoticed, but a camera found her too. She shielded her face, stumbling into a waiting car, her world collapsing alongside Evan's. Inside the ballroom, Claire breathed in slowly, letting the air settle in her lungs. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She felt lighter. For the first time since Eli's death, she wasn't drowning. Richard placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "One phase remains," he said softly. "And it's the one that matters most." Claire turned to him, brows furrowing. "What phase?" Richard met her eyes. "The one where you reclaim your life publicly on your terms." Claire exhaled shakily. Because the final reckoning wasn't about Evan's fall, it was about her rise. The morning after Evan's public downfall, Manhattan felt brighter, almost as if the city itself had exhaled. Claire walked along Central Park's edge, the crisp air brushing against her cheeks, leaves rustling softly beneath her heels. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't rushing anywhere. She wasn't bracing for news. She wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's sins. She was simply living. Her studio quickly became the talk of the design community. Publications praised her vision. Clients lined up. And with every project she completed, Claire stitched one more piece of herself back together. But the real turning point came a month later. At a charity gala, she chose to attend a different one from the night of Evan's collapse. This gala honored families who had faced loss, those who had walked through grief and come out stronger. Claire was invited not as a guest, but as a speaker. She hesitated at first. Speaking publicly meant opening parts of her soul she had desperately tried to protect. But Richard encouraged her gently. "Your story," he said, "will help someone else breathe again." So she agreed. That night, standing beneath soft golden lighting, Claire stepped up to the podium. She wore a simple black gown, elegant and calm, not flashy, not dramatic, just honest. She began quietly. I lost my son this year, and for a long time I thought I had lost myself too. The room stilled. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning how to live again, even when a part of you stays tender forever. She spoke about love, about survival, about the people who show up when your world breaks and the people who don't. She didn't mention Evan by name. She didn't need to. The truth was already written across headlines and legal reports. When she finished, the room rose in a standing ovation, not because she was tragic, but because she was strong. After the event, Richard walked her outside, where the city lights shimmered along Fifth Avenue. "Your mother would be proud," he said softly. Claire smiled, tears warming her eyes. I'm finally proud of myself." They stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold night air. The chapter of betrayal, loss, and vengeance had closed. Justice had taken its course. Evan's influence had evaporated. Sienna had disappeared from the spotlight. And Claire, who once felt life had ended, was beginning again. She glanced upward, imagining Eli somewhere in the quiet, in the light. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. Then she turned toward the car, ready for whatever came next. Because the world no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning. And somewhere deep inside her heart, hope finally opened its eyes again. So, that's where our story comes to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, my friend, it means something in this journey touched you. Maybe a memory, maybe a wound, maybe a quiet part of your heart you don't always show the world. And that's okay. You're not alone. Life breaks us in ways we never expect, but like Marcus Aurelius said, the mind adapts and turns obstacles into fuel. Claire's journey reminds us that healing isn't loud, it's not quick. It's the strength to take one more breath, one more step, and choose not to let pain define the rest of your life. Maybe you're walking through your own storm, maybe someone disappointed you, or life didn't go the way you prayed it would. But remember this. You are allowed to begin again. You are allowed to rise. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply becoming the person you were meant to be all along. If this story gave you even a little light, a little comfort, or a moment of courage, go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't walk these journeys alone. We're here with you every step, every story, every night. You need a voice to remind you that you still matter.